Think about the last time you sent a text, and then immediately sent another one explaining the first. Think about the last time you said no to someone, and then spent the next 3 hours constructing a mental courtroom argument for why your no was reasonable. Think about the last time you walked into a room in a bad mood and the first thing out of your mouth was an apology for it. You didn't hurt anyone. You didn't break anything. You just felt something. And your nervous system launched a full PR campaign to manage the fallout. This is the behavior right here. Quiet, constant, almost invisible. The compulsion to explain yourself. And here is the thing that nobody talks about. It doesn't feel like a problem. It feels like being a good person. It feels like being considerate, emotionally mature, and easy to be around. It's wrapped in the language of empathy. But underneath that packaging, underneath the justifications, the qualifiers, the preemptive apologies, is something that Carl Jung would have recognized immediately. Not politeness, not emotional intelligence. A wound, a very old, very deep wound when dressed up in the clothes of social grace. This video is a deep analysis of why so many people live trapped in the need to justify their own existence, and what happens, psychologically and relationally, when they finally choose to stop. When they discover that silence is not avoidance, it's authority. When they realize that the moment they stop explaining themselves, the world stops requiring the explanation. We are going to dismantle the mechanism that keeps you performing for an audience that never asked to be seated. And by the end of this, you won't just understand what's happening. You will feel it shift inside you. But first, we need to go back to the beginning. Because this didn't start with the text you over-explained this morning. It started somewhere far earlier and far more painful. There is a specific kind of childhood that manufactures this behavior. It doesn't require dramatic abuse. It doesn't require a monster in the house. It can happen in a quiet kitchen, at a dinner table, inside a perfectly normal family, with perfectly ordinary cruelty. A child comes home frightened and the parent says there is nothing to be afraid of. A child cries and they're told, "You're being dramatic." A child feels left out and they hear, "Stop being so sensitive." The words are different. The message is always the same. What you feel is not real. What you feel is not welcome. What you feel must be renegotiated before I will take it seriously. And here is where Carl Jung becomes essential. Jung understood that the psyche of a child is not yet armored. The child has not yet developed the internal scaffolding to hold their own reality against the weight of a dismissive adult. So when the outer world repeatedly rejects the child's inner world, the child doesn't conclude that the adult is wrong. The child concludes that they are wrong. They internalize the verdict. My feelings are only legitimate if someone else approves of them. My reality only exists if someone else confirms it. And from that moment forward, they begin the habit that will follow them for decades. The habit of building a case for themselves, of pre-justifying their emotions, of defending their inner life before anyone has even put it on trial. This is the origin of the compulsion, not rudeness, not weakness, survival. The child who learned to explain themselves was doing something intelligent in context. They were managing the unpredictable emotional environment of the people they depended on. If I can explain it well enough, they won't reject me. If I can make it logical enough, they won't pull away. If I can make my feelings small enough, they will still love me. It worked, or at least it worked well enough to survive. And so the behavior calcified. It became an unconscious reflex. So deeply embedded that by adulthood you don't even register it as a learned response. It simply feels like who you are. I'm just someone who likes to communicate clearly. I just believe in transparency. I just don't want people to misunderstand me. Jung would call this the persona, the mask the psyche constructs to navigate the social world. And the tragedy of the persona isn't that it's false. It's that over time we forget we're wearing it. We stop being the ones holding the mask. We become the mask. And the self, the real self, the one underneath, starts to suffocate. But the wound goes even deeper than this. Because it's not just about what you say, it's about what you have silently agreed to. Every time you explain yourself, you are implicitly agreeing to something. You are agreeing that your feelings require a defense, your choices require a legal brief, that your existence to be acceptable must be legible to whoever happens to be looking. You are agreeing, without ever using these words, that you need permission to be real, and that agreement, that silent decades-long agreement, is what we are here to break. But before we can break it, you need to see the full price you've been paying. Because most people think this habit is harmless. Most people have no idea what it has actually been costing them. It doesn't feel like self-betrayal when you're doing it. It feels like being reasonable. It feels like keeping the peace. It feels like being the emotionally mature one in the room. The one who doesn't make things messy. But Carl Jung was precise about this. He called it a continuous act of self-abandonment. Not a dramatic falling away from yourself, not a single catastrophic choice. A quiet, daily erosion, so gradual you don't notice the ground disappearing beneath you. Here is what that looks like in real life. You set a limit with someone, a friend, a partner, a colleague, and they push back. Not aggressively, just a question. Why? And immediately your entire nervous system activates. You start to explain. You start to build the case. You tell them about your work schedule, about your history, about the context that makes your limit reasonable. And you keep talking, past the point where the explanation is helpful. Because somewhere in your body you know that if the explanation is good enough, they won't be angry, they won't be hurt, they won't leave. Do you see what just happened? You didn't just explain your limit, you put your right to have a trial limit, and you invited them to be the judge. Or this one. You're sad, not for a dramatic reason, just quietly, heavily sad, the kind of sadness that sits in the chest without an obvious cause, and a friend notices. What's wrong? And instead of saying, I don't know, I just feel heavy today, you scramble for a narrative. Something logical, something reasonable. You tell them about the stressful week, the sleep deprivation, the difficult conversation. You give them the evidence. Because the raw truth, I'm sad and I don't know why, doesn't feel safe to say. It feels like too much, like it needs a justification before it deserves space. Jung identified this as the ego disconnected from the self. The ego, in its desperate attempt to maintain social safety, filters, edits, rationalizes, and packages the inner experience until it's acceptable to the outer audience. And here is the cost. The emotions you package never actually get felt. The sadness you explain away never moves through you. The anger you rationalize never gets transformed. It all gets converted into language, into performance, and the actual experience underneath just sits there, compressed, unexpressed, building weight. This is what Jung meant when he warned about the shadow, the parts of yourself you refuse to let be seen. Eventually, they don't disappear. They go underground, and they begin to run things from below the surface. They leak out in moments you don't expect, in the sudden irritability that surprises even you, in the deep tiredness that no amount of sleep fixes, in the low-grade anxiety of always being slightly on stage, never fully at rest in your own skin. And the relational cost is just as severe. When you explain yourself constantly, you teach people something. You teach them that your limits are negotiable, that your emotions require convincing, that if they push back hard enough or long enough, you will eventually yield or fold or over-clarify until the discomfort dissolves. You train people without meaning to not take you seriously at full volume, because they learn the first statement is never final. Wait for the explanation. The explanation is where the cracks are. There's something even more painful beneath that, something that most people never name. The relationships you build from this place, the friendships, the partnerships, the dynamics at work, they are not built on who you are. They are built on the version of you that justifies itself, the version that apologizes before being accused, the version that makes itself small enough to be held. And deep down, you know it. You know that if you stopped explaining, if you showed up in your full, undefended reality, some of those people would leave. And that knowledge keeps the habit alive, because the fear isn't just that they won't understand me. The real fear is, if I stop explaining, I will find out who actually stays. That is the invisible cost, and it runs all the way down. But here is where it gets interesting, because this awareness, as uncomfortable as it is not the end. It is the doorway. And what waits on the other side of it is something Jung called one of the most radical transformations available to a human being. Internal authority, not confidence as a performance, not assertiveness as a social skill, something more fundamental, something that changes not just what you do, but what you emanate. What that actually looks like, and why the world responds to it in ways that will surprise you. That is what we explore next. There is a version of you that does not explain, not because they are cold, not because they are arrogant, not because they have stopped caring about connection, but because they have found something beneath the need for validation, a ground solid enough to stand on without an audience. Jung called this the self, capital S, not the ego, which is perpetually managing its reputation, but the deeper, more integrated core of who you are. The part that doesn't require a verdict, the part that doesn't fall apart in the silence after an unexplained statement. Developing internal authority, Jung's internal authority, is not a technique. It is not something you rehearse in the mirror before a difficult conversation. It is a fundamental restructuring of where your psychological weight sits. Right now, for most people, the weight sits outside, in how they are perceived, in whether they are understood, in the expression on someone's face after they've said something honest. The entire system is calibrated around external feedback, and that makes a person perpetually reactive, perpetually anxious, perpetually auditioning. Internal authority moves that weight inside. It plants the center of gravity in your own perception of your own experience, and it holds there even when the external world doesn't confirm it. This is not indifference, it is independence. And the way you begin to access it is through one practice that sounds almost too simple, but is in reality one of the hardest things you will ever do. You let the discomfort of being misunderstood exist, without fixing it. Someone misreads your tone and you don't clarify. You let it sit. Someone questions your decision and you say, "This is what I've decided," and then stop talking. Someone seems hurt by something you did and you don't launch a 12-text campaign to rebuild the moment. You hold your ground. You stay present. You resist the gravitational pull toward over-explanation. And what happens in that moment, in that uncomfortable, shaking, pulse-elevating moment of held silence, is everything. Because your nervous system is waiting for confirmation that the world has ended. It's running the old program: explain, justify, smooth it over. Don't let them walk away without understanding you. And when you don't follow the program, when you hold the silence instead, when the nervous system eventually gets a new data point. I didn't explain. They didn't leave. I'm still here. I'm still real. This is how the repatterning begins. Not through insight alone, though insight matters. Through experience. Through the accumulated evidence of survived misunderstandings. Through discovering one holds silence at a time, that you do not require comprehension to remain intact. Jung spoke about the process of individuation as the most courageous work a human being can undertake. Because individuation, becoming truly wholly yourself, requires something that runs directly against every social conditioning you've ever received. It requires the willingness to be misunderstood, to be seen incompletely, to hold a truth that others cannot access, and refuse to dismantle it just because no one else is holding it with you. This is what real strength looks like, not aggression, not walls, a kind of quiet, unmovable rootedness. Now here is something crucial, because this is where most people get it wrong. Developing internal authority does not mean you stop communicating. It does not mean you become withholding or emotionally unavailable or deliberately mysterious. Integrated people are often extraordinarily expressive. The difference is where the expression comes from. When you explain from fear, you are defending. When you communicate from authority, you are sharing. Defending is transactional. It's trying to produce a specific response in the other person. It's managing their reaction. Sharing is sovereign. It is the simple act of being visible without attachment to what happens when you are seen. This is the shift, from defense to disclosure, from management to presence, from performing to simply being. And when this shift begins, really begins, something happens that is almost impossible to anticipate until you've lived it. The world around you starts to respond differently, not all at once, not dramatically but unmistakably. People begin to take you at your word on the first statement. Negotiations become simpler, relationships become quieter and deeper. And something else, something stranger and more beautiful, begins to happen in your own inner world. The anxiety decreases, not because your circumstances change, but because you are no longer spending psychic energy on the management of perception. You are no longer maintaining the theater. And the energy that was being consumed by that, the constant low-grade vigilance of someone who believes they must be understood to be safe, that energy becomes available. It returns to you, and what you do with it, how it changes not just your relationships but your presence, your creativity, your sense of self. That is where the real transformation lives. But there is one more layer. One more thing that happens when the internal shift takes hold. And it's the part that will make you understand why Jung considered this work not just psychological, but almost spiritual. When a person stops explaining themselves, the room changes. Not metaphorically, actually physically. The energy configuration of whatever space they walk into shifts. Because something is being emitted that the people around them unconsciously detect. Something that has no name in casual language but that everyone instantly recognizes. Psychological coherence. This is the presence of someone whose inside matches their outside. Someone who is not performing a version of themselves calibrated for the current audience. Someone whose words and silence both come from the same source. And that source is real. Jung understood that the human psyche is exquisitely sensitive to this kind of authenticity. We are social animals with millions of years of evolution spent reading each other for trustworthiness. And the thing we register most powerfully pondered beneath the words, beneath the facial expressions, beneath everything on the surface, is whether a person is solid, not perfect, not powerful in the conventional sense, solid, integrated, in possession of themselves. A person who explains compulsively signals the opposite. They signal, even when the content of their explanations is reasonable, that there is a gap between what they actually feel and what they're willing to let be seen. And other people unconsciously sense that gap. They may not be able to name it, but they respond to it. This is why the nice person, the endlessly accommodating person, the one who over-explains and over-justifies and never lets anything be uncomfortable, often gets less respect than someone far less actively considerate. It seems backwards, but it is perfectly logical. The over-explainer is signaling insecurity. They are saying through every justification, "I am not sure I have the right to be here as I am, so please, let me make a case." And people respond to that signal by treating the case as something that requires evaluation, which means the case can also be rejected. Now place next to that person someone who simply is, someone who sets a limit and doesn't follow it with an apology tour, someone who disagrees and doesn't reconstruct their entire argument when questioned, someone who is quiet without filling the quiet with words. Someone who, when asked why they made a particular choice, says simply, "Because it's right for me," and holds the stillness that follows. The room responds, not because that person has done anything dramatic, because they are emitting a frequency that most people have never cultivated. The frequency of self-possession. And here is something that may feel counterintuitive. This is not something you can fake. You cannot arrive at a difficult conversation, decide to perform this kind of authority and expect it to land. People will feel the performance. The very fact that you're trying to appear grounded signals that you don't yet trust your own ground. This is why Jung called it a process. Individuation is not a destination you arrive at and then inhabit permanently. It is a practice. A daily return to yourself, a daily choosing of your own reality over the seductive comfort of external confirmation. But when the practice takes hold, when it becomes your default, the relational shifts are profound. The dynamic with people who previously pushed your limits simply changes, not through confrontation, but because you're no longer showing up in the configuration they learned to work with. The version of you they knew, the one who would yield with enough pressure, who would explain until the discomfort resolved. That version is no longer present, and they must recalibrate. Some will, some won't, and this is a part of the process that is genuinely painful, and that no script about psychological growth should gloss over. When you stop explaining yourself, some people will decide you have changed. They will be right. They will tell you that you've become cold, distant, arrogant, and selfish. Because what they are actually responding to is the removal of a dynamic they relied on. The dynamic where your discomfort was available for their management. Where your openness to self-doubt meant they never had to question themselves. Your security to an insecure person can look like arrogance. Your boundaries to someone accustomed to your porousness can look like abandonment. Your silence to someone who expected your constant justification can look like contempt. This is not a reason to go back. It is confirmation that the shift is real. Because the connections that survive this, the friendships that remain, the partnerships that adjust, the professional relationships that reconfigure, those are built on something entirely different than what came before. They are built on your actual self, which means they have a foundation, which means they can hold weight, and new connections, the ones that enter your life after the shift. They come toward the real version of you. They find you without the performance, and they stay because of what actually is, not because of what you convince them to accept. The professional dimension of this is equally dramatic. Because the same dynamic that plays out in personal relationships plays out in every room you enter for work. The person who over-explains in negotiations teaches the other side that their position is not fixed. The person who justifies every decision to their team signals that the decisions are open for debate. The person who pre-apologizes for their ideas before presenting them invites the room to treat the ideas as fragile. Stop explaining, and the ideas land differently. Stop justifying, and the decisions carry more weight. Stop apologizing for your presence, and your presence begins to shape the room. This is not manipulation. This is physics. You are not trying to control others' perception. You are simply ceasing to undercut your own signal. And then, quietly, almost invisibly, something begins to happen on the inside that is, in some ways, more significant than any of the relational changes. You start to hear yourself. There is a kind of silence that most people have never experienced. Not the silence of avoidance, not the silence that comes from swallowing something that needed to be said, not the painful, pressurized silence of someone sitting in a room full of unexpressed truth. The silence on the other side, the silence that arrives after you have stopped building the case, after you have held the limit without a footnote, after you have let the misunderstanding exist without dismantling it. It is quiet in there, remarkably quiet. And in that quiet, something begins to speak that most people have not heard clearly in years. Themselves, not the voice that is constantly narrating the social situation, calculating the reactions, preparing the next defense. The actual inner voice, the one that knows, without needing data to support it, what it needs, what it wants, what it will no longer accept, what it still believes in despite the external noise. This is what Jung called returning to the self, and it is both the method and the destination of the work we've been discussing. Because the extraordinary paradox at the heart of all of this is that the more you stop performing for the world, the more the world becomes available to you. The more you stop trying to be understood, the more you begin to understand yourself. And from that understanding, from that ground, a different kind of relationship with everything becomes possible. A relationship built on contact rather than performance, on presence rather than approval, on what is actually true rather than what is strategically legible. This does not mean you become someone who doesn't communicate, who doesn't connect, who moves through the world in hermetic self-sufficiency. Quite the opposite. Integrated people are often among the warmest, most genuinely present people in any room. Because warmth from strength, warmth that is given freely, not offered as a bid for acceptance, is entirely different from the warmth of the person who is endlessly accommodating in the hope of being liked. One is a gift, the other is a transaction. And when you start giving from the first place, from genuine fullness rather than anxious generosity, people feel the difference. They don't always know why, but they lean in differently. They trust differently. They relax in your presence in a way they don't when they are around someone whose warmth is conditional on being received well. You become, without announcing it, without working for it, a kind of anchor. Someone around whom other people feel oddly more like themselves, because your own settledness gives them permission to be settled. Your refusal to negotiate your own inner world creates, paradoxically, more safety for everyone else's inner world. This is the end state that Jung pointed toward, not a person who has become invulnerable, not a person who has transcended the need for connection. A person who is finally, genuinely in a relationship with themselves, and from that place capable of being in a real relationship with others. So here is the work, not a 10-step program, not a framework to implement. One practice sustained over time. The next time the impulse to explain yourself arrives, notice it. Don't fight it. Don't shame yourself for feeling it. Just notice the shape of it. Notice what it wants. Notice what it is protecting. And then ask yourself quietly, honestly, is this explanation for them? Or is it for me? Is this communication or is this defense? Am I sharing something true or am I managing something feared? If it is true, share it clearly, without apology, without over-elaboration. Say the thing and let it be said. If it is defense, hold the silence instead. Let the discomfort exist. Let the misunderstanding sit. Let the moment be incomplete. And discover, perhaps for the first time, that you survive it entirely. Do this once, then do it again, and then again, and watch. Over weeks, over months, as the weight that has been sitting outside you your whole life begins slowly to migrate inward. As you stop requiring the world's comprehension to feel like you exist, as the old anxious noise of the performance starts to quiet. That quiet is not emptiness. It is an arrival. It is the sound of someone who has stopped auditioning and started living. Carl Jung spent his entire intellectual life mapping the territory between the person you perform and the person you actually are. And the distance between those two people is the distance you have to travel. It is the most important journey you will ever make. And every single time you resist the compulsion to justify your existence, you take a step. So let me ask you this. What is the explanation you keep giving? The one you have rehearsed so many times it feels like truth, that if you stop and sit with it honestly, you know you no longer want to give? Maybe it is about your boundaries. Maybe it is about an emotion you are tired of defending. Maybe it is about who you chose to be, or who you chose to leave, or how you have chosen to spend your time. Write it in the comments, not to explain yourself, but to name it. Because naming it is different from defending it. Naming it is the first act of ownership. This is where it begins, not with a transformation that happens to you, but with a choice you make again and again in the small, quiet moments where the old program fires and you decide instead to hold your ground. The world will adjust, it always does. But first you have to stop asking for its permission. If this landed somewhere real in you, share it with someone who explains themselves too much. They will understand why you sent it. Like the video. Subscribe. The next one continues this journey, and it goes even deeper. The work is not over. It has just begun.